Good afternoon, or I guess good late morning to everybody. My name is Mike Psenka, and I'm the CEO and founder of eThority. We're an analytics firm, a software technology and services analytics firm. We've been in business since 1992, and today we're here to talk to you today about why following the leader is a huge mistake, and how becoming a leader is all about making do with the resources that you have today. But quick question, before I get into the presentation, I want to get an understanding of the audience. Can I see a show of hands? There are a lot of different people, obviously, at this conference, and I kind of want to understand the audience that I'm speaking to. Can I see a show of hands of people who are currently students here? Great. A show of hands of people who are actively involved sort of in the analytics part of a sports organization? And, okay, great. Of those folks, how many are currently programming SAS, SPSS, RS? Okay, and then how many would say they're more business users, want to know more about analytics, want to get more involved in it, but are definitely not programmers? Okay, hey, great, thank you. All right. Analytics obviously can play an essential role, and a big part of what we want to talk about, and obviously this whole conference is about sports analytics, but technology by itself equals failure. And one of the things that we've seen, and I'll talk a little about our history. We came from academic medicine, healthcare. And analytics has played a long history in healthcare. It's evolving in sports analytics, obviously. One of the things that we've learned almost 2 decades, that when technology by itself was implemented, it almost always resulted in failure. Lots of shelfware in organizations, lots of frustration, I think, by the analysts and the technologists, that they couldn't integrate and deliver that value to the organization. And what we saw was that it was really a combination of technology, process, and content. Now, once again, I'm sure you all have access to technology or work with technology, and there's clearly a lot of content in the marketplace today as well. I mean, there are a lot of great vendors out there. I think sports, in some ways, rivals a lot of industries around the level and the true richness of content that you have. But what seems to be missing, or we look at this as a process, and a process to integrate analytics throughout the entire organization. So it's not just about an athlete's performance, but it's about marketing and it's about the business side of things as well. All right. Murphy's Law is jumping in here. It'll jump forward 3 or 4 slides in a second, I'm sure. I got one of those new solid-state drives, which is obviously supposed to be faster, but unfortunately there's a driver issue which causes my machine to freeze from time to time. So the next issue that we look at when we talk about the gap, what is the problem with technology and process today? Well, the problem is that there's a gap. There's a sphere of influence of subject matter expertise, and then there's knowledge about that subject matter expertise in statistical analysis. And those two spheres are separate elements. Here we go. So we've got a gap between these two areas. And this gap is common in almost all fields. But ultimately, to gain insight, we've got to provide user-obvious tools to the subject matter experts so they can discover those new insights. It's not really probable that we're going to create statisticians out of all the subject matter experts. So it's very important that we move these two spheres together. Well, before we talk about that, we want to say, why analytics? Well, our intuition on statistics is commonly just wrong. And this is a big issue that I think people don't realize. Well, do we want to do analytics? Human beings have a tendency to do a lot of stuff by gut instinct, right? But with statistics, we're wrong. So many of you may know the birthday problem, but I'll ask the question, and if you know it, don't give away the answer, but we've got a gift card here for anyone who knows the right answer. The birthday problem has to do with what is the probability of a number of people having the same birthday in a room. So if you had 23 people in a room, and we've got more than 23 people in a room right now, what would you say the probability is that those 23 people have the same, that 2 people in that room have the same birthday? Any guesses? Anyone? No one's brave? Come on, someone's got it. Yes? 50%. It's a good guess. I'm guessing you know the answer. Right. And it's 51%. Well, it doesn't make sense. Most people will go, well, you know, it's 23 out of 365. And, you know, in other conferences we'll go through this. In almost every case when we have a crowd like this, multiple people will have the same birthday. 30 people at 71%, and as our director of predictive analytics says, he goes to funerals and makes this bet. When there's over 50 people, it's easy money. So that doesn't make sense, right? But the math supports it. Likewise, when we talk about, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bayes' theorem, which is a statistical modeling technique. There are a lot of tests, right? We go to hospitals for tests, doctors for tests, and they talk about specificity and sensitivity of tests. And you can have a test that's 99% accurate. If you have the disease, it'll get it. 95% of the time sensitivity on that test. And when people test positive, you go, oh my gosh, well, if it's 99% accurate, I must have the disease. Well, in fact, it's only a 17% chance in that instance if the prevalence of that disease is 1%. And once again, it doesn't make sense, right? And as human beings, we don't understand those, but they do drive reality. Why reason number 2 for analytics? So does anyone in the room trying to initiate an analytics process within an organization and maybe getting resistance on that? Anyone seeing resistance? So reason number 2 for why you want to utilize analytics in your organization. So gunpowder was invented by the Chinese around 800 AD. And when it was initially used, it was used for fireworks. And it wasn't really a big deal that you didn't have gunpowder when it was used as fireworks. But it was pretty shortly thereafter weaponized, and it became a really big deal when you didn't have gunpowder after that. And that's what's happening with predictive analytics. It's certainly happening in corporate America. It's obviously moved into competitive athletics, and it's growing more and more every day. You know, the previous speaker was talking about that as well, saying when I come back in 2051, how the landscape would change. So ultimately, you have to ask your organization, what do you want to compete in? What do you want to compete with? Bows and arrows or guns as you move forward? And analytics and predictive analytics can have a transformative influence to your organization. So let's talk a little about, as we had mentioned before, about methodology. So our organization, we have something called a Vital Answers methodology. And once again, predictive analytics is not just about lobbing technology over a fence. At an organization, it's about ingraining that in every part of the organization. So there are 4 parts of the methodology. The first is sort of an assessment stage. And in the assessment stage, we've got an analytics maturity model. And we talk about the various stages in that analytics maturity model. A stage 0 is you're not measuring anything or you have no measurements. A stage 1 is simple measures. We're tracking whether that's a 40-time completion rates. A stage 2 is internal benchmarking, where you've got a measurement and you're saying, hey, here's the target. This is really what we would like to hit. Stage 3, you've got those benchmarks and those scores aligned to your organizational goals and objectives. And I think, once again, this is another issue that we see a lot of disparity in the market around is, hey, we're measuring lots of things. Are the things you're measuring important? Are they really going to drive performance? And then stage 4 is about predictive performance. So measuring, setting benchmarks, and working those against predictions, right? And ultimately, the predictive performance is about where you think that organization is going to go, how you're going to perform, and managing that in real time. So there are a lot of organizations that say, hey, we are using predictive analytics, we are measuring that, but they really haven't completed stage 3 because they haven't aligned and distributed that information throughout the organization. In many cases, there's a small, tight-knit analytics group that has trouble trying to get that information throughout the rest of the organization. Now, the second part of the methodology is the diagnostic part. And we talk about 3 things in the diagnostic part of the methodology. That the metric that you're looking at, whatever you're measuring, it's got to be important, observable, and actionable. And so at a rough level, you know, important, observable, and actionable. Well, your age. Your age is important and observable, but it's not actionable. But you can look at other metrics that are actionable, obviously, for the organization. But the prioritization of what is important, observable, and actionable matters, and we'll talk about it later because it comes to simplicity. There are obviously billions of data points that you can collect. It is really important to prioritize what is going to move the needle for that organization, whether it's the athletic performance of the team or whether it's the marketing performance of the business organization selling tickets and moving information out. There's also execution of an effective analytics program, and that is, there's a technical execution, obviously. The technology has to get implemented, but there's also a mobilization of this process that it needs to occur inside of the organization. And once again, it has to occur in all parts of the organization, and it occurs at varying levels. The good news is, you don't need to lose heart to say, well, I don't know what stage we're at, and we'll never get there. It's a process, and you are at some stage of this, whether you realize it or not, and it's a process that you have to go through to move to the next level, and organizations are moving through that process. The last part is validation. And validation, where we talk about continued relevance, is things get set up and they just kind of get measured forever. And obviously this is a dynamic industry. It's really important to continually vet and make sure that what you're looking at is relevant to the next game, to the next process. And once again, that's whether that's the competitive athletics side or whether that's the marketing side. Any questions on this? And we'll have a question session at the end, but just want to make sure, please feel free to ask questions if you have them as we go through it. Thank you. Okay, technology. Now, there are several elements that we see as essential for an effective technology platform, and there are a lot of elements. And the first is to be able to, the very first on the list is to be able to connect and collect data from all and multiple disparate sources. And the reason why this is important is ultimately if you're going to create an effective analytics platform, you want to make sure that you have as many viable dimensions as possible in that data set. And a lot of people will adopt models that were created. Oh, this organization created this model. This appears to be predictive of this. And there's a really big problem with that. As once again, on the predictive side, it's analogous to creating a really detailed map of France and then going to Germany and saying, boy, that map of France is awesome, so let's use it here in Germany. It doesn't apply. So you have to make sure that you're connecting to all of your data sets to get an effective setup. User obvious, and we'll talk about user obvious later and why that's important, a user obvious query so you can continue to do discovery. Benchmarking is essential in publishing those benchmarks so people understand how they're being measured and what they're being measured against. This is also, once again, a part that seems to be lost. A lot of measurement occurs, but the goals are not being communicated to the people expected to perform. Automating distribution so you can get that information out, advanced drill down, and we'll go through some of this as we talk about the technology. Being able to integrate to your existing environments, having a predictive analytics component. We'll talk a little about a new visualization called a variance map, and the technologies need to be self-teaching. So why user obvious? One of the big things that we push is a user obvious design in the technology side. And there are several reasons. When you talk about interfacing with technology and analytics, and obviously analytics is very heavily technology driven, we talk about interest, adoption, and retention. And this cycle exists in any technology that is utilized. In a traditional user interface, there's sort of a set, we talk about a traditional user interface, maybe a non-user obvious interface. The populations are smaller for interest, adoption, and retention. But when we talk about a user obvious interface, the populations are geometrically larger. And that's important for your organization because ultimately